Hey guys, welcome back to the Salt and Light podcast. We're going to be looking at Ecclesiastes chapter 6 today, and I'm calling this God Rewards Faith. Now, in this chapter, it's going to be a really short chapter, so to kind of fill up some time, we're going to be going back to chapter 2 and chapter 5 because they all relate together. But what he does in chapter 6, this really short chapter, he goes back into how riches don't really, in the eyes of God, merit anything. When in our eyes, it does merit. Not that it merits anything with God, but we have this mentality, and we may not even realize it, but it's almost like in the back of our head that whenever we accumulate to ourselves, it's almost like we're sustaining our own lives. But God says, no, that is not true life. Yes, it's keeping you alive here on earth, but that isn't what true life is. Anyway, but what he does in chapter 6 is Solomon goes and describes the richest man you could possibly think of, and then he describes the poorest man he could possibly think of. Now, he does use some exaggeration here, but it's all to make his point. But let me just begin reading, just with that in mind. He says, "There is an evil which I have seen under the sun, and it is common among men." So this is something that happens to many people. And I want you to think of America as you read this, because our country reflects this the most. It says, "A man to whom God has given riches and wealth and honor, so that he lacks nothing for himself of all he desires, yet God does not give him power to eat of it, but a foreigner consumes it." Now, if you've read up to chapter 6, you'll see that Solomon is discussing the curse, and what the curse does to you is it consumes you as you're consuming other things. So here in America, think of, I guess for a good example, you could think of a spoiled rich kid. They have a desire that's almost like a bottomless pit. They have everything they could ever want, yet they're bored. It's almost like they're still not satisfied, and they're like, well, I want the next big thing. And then when they get that, they're still not satisfied. Now, what is also like this? Well, a fire. Now, there's a passion within him. It's called a sinful heart that is likened to a consuming fire. He doesn't realize, this person who follows the flesh doesn't realize they're literally on fire, and everything that the fire consumes, it's not satisfied. It needs more to feed its flame. So it's consuming whatever it touches, and it's consuming himself. Men without faith, what they end up doing is they end up reflecting hell. Because think, the appetite is bottomless, and the sin and passion that is in their heart, that is like a fire burning, consumes them and their fellow man. It is an exact reflection of hell. Yet he doesn't realize that, and that's why his soul is still not satisfied, even though he's getting the things he wants. And that's kind of what the power to eat of it means. If God gives you power to eat of it, that means you'll have God will give you joy and enjoyment in those things, yet the person who forsakes God doesn't have that enjoyment. Nothing makes them happy. All right, so with that in mind, I'm going to continue. He says, "This is vanity, and it is an evil affliction." And affliction just means something that causes pain, and then evil would mean godless. So this is a man without faith that's afflicting himself by rejecting God. So now he's going to go into the exaggeration. This is going to be, basically going to describe the richest man he could conceive of in his mind. He says, if a man begets 100 children and lives many years, so that the days of his years are many, but his soul is not satisfied with goodness, or indeed he has no burial, I say that a stillborn child is better than he. Okay, so this exaggeration, he uses children, which if you had children, that was definitely known as a blessing from God, especially if you read, what God says about children. That's the biggest blessing you can get. He's saying if a man had 100 children and then lived many years, but his soul was not satisfied with goodness, and we know as Christians that ultimately is Christ and the forgiveness of your sins. And then it says, indeed, or if he has no burial. Now, that actually means that whenever you die, you don't have a good name for yourself. You are forgotten. There's no remembrance of you. And there is a passage here, I'm going to try to find it, but it basically says the wicked man is consumed and then forgotten about. So that's what I'll just leave it at that. So, and the wicked man is, yes, one who sins, of course. That would make us all wicked. However, when it says wicked man, or if you see righteous or wicked people don't have faith. Righteous people have faith. That's the difference. It's not that one sins more than the other. It's not weighed out that way. Of course, if you have faith, you're not going to want to sin, so I'm not condoning sin. But I'm just going to make that distinction. Whenever you see righteousness, that means somebody with faith, and when you see wickedness, that means someone who does not have faith. Okay, so now he's going to talk about the stillborn child, and this is where there's definitely stillborn children. See, he overemphasizes the rich man, but now when it comes to the stillborn child, there are stillborn children. However, I don't think you could find a man with 100 children, so he exaggerates that. But think about it. A stillborn child, what do they own? Nothing whatsoever. When a stillborn child doesn't even own a name. Now, the parents may have picked out a name, but that child will have never heard it. That child will not know that was his name. That child did not even get to own his own meal, not even one meal. He didn't even get to see anything. He literally owned nothing. That's as poor as you can get. So verse 4, describing the stillborn child, says, "For it comes in vanity and departs in darkness, and its name is covered with darkness." So literally, had no name, never saw light, never saw anything. It says in verse 5, "Though it has not seen the sun or known anything, this has more rest than that man." So here's the comparison. Richest man you could possibly think of, yet his soul continually seeks, never satisfied with anything because he has not placed his faith in the Lord, versus a stillborn child. Now, as we know, when children die and they don't reach the age of accountability, they go to be with the Lord. So the stillborn child is with God. So what does it say? It says that he had more rest than the man who had many children, lived many years, and had everything his heart desired. Then it goes on to say in verse 6, "Even if he lives 1,000 years twice, but has not seen goodness." Let me read the whole thing. It says, talking about the stillborn child, "Though it has not seen the sun nor known anything, he has more rest than that man, even if he lives 1,000 years twice, but has not seen goodness." So what does that mean? That basically means he has not seen the truth. He has not seen the one good in the entire universe. It's out of his mind. he doesn't have faith in the one good God. So in that way, he has not seen goodness. Now, what is faith? Just a little description of faith. Faith is your response shown through actions to what God says is true. For instance, with riches, God says, I own everything. However, if we reject truth, we lie to ourselves and say, no, I own it. But if you listen to God, you say, okay, I don't own it, you do. How do you want me to use these things since they are yours? And in that sense, you don't think you're rich, even though you technically are, but you see yourself as poor because you realize the truth that God actually owns it. So through faith, you are brought knowledge and truth, and you act on it by treating your wealth the way God would want you to treat it. Hopefully that makes sense to you. Okay, so we're going to go back in Ecclesiastes to chapter 2 real quick because he gives the same idea in chapter 2. Now, this chapter kind of goes into where he hates his labor because without faith, he realizes that the proceeds of his labor, what he quote unquote gains from it, he doesn't really get to partake of because his satisfaction is not met, and he still longs for something more. So let me read that real quick. Quick review. Chapter 2, verse 18, it says, Then I hated all my labor in which I have toiled under the sun, because I must leave it to the man who will come after me. And who knows whether he will be wise or a fool? Yet he will rule over all my labor in which I toiled, and in which I have shown myself wise under the sun. This also is vanity. Therefore I turned my heart and despaired of all my labor, which I had toiled under the sun. For there is a man whose labor is with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, yet he must leave his heritage to a man who has not labored for it. This also is vanity and a great evil. He's basically saying that this man has no power to enjoy his labor, and instead he hates his labor, and he despises it and despairs that all the labor that he had done, somebody else is going to enjoy it because he is in turmoil inside himself. And it continues, For what has man for all his labor, and for the striving of his heart, with which he has toiled under the sun? For all his days are sorrowful, and the work is burdensome. Even in the night, his heart takes no rest. So it's basically saying that this man without faith, even though he has so much surrounding him that should give him assurance, in his soul he yearns for something more and has no real rest. Now, this man who doesn't have faith doesn't realize that he has no rest because of sin. The Bible tells us that sin gives us no assurance of life. And that is why the rest isn't there. So and then he says this also is vanity. So that ends the outlook on riches without faith. Then in the next section, he starts saying, okay, well, with faith, this is how riches should be viewed. Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verses 24 through 26. Now, faith will allow you to enjoy the temporary riches because we know how to properly treat them, because God has given us knowledge about the riches that he has given us. So when you're given knowledge and joy from God, he lets you know that everything is for his glory. So whether you take your riches and you give in his name, or consume and show gratitude and thankfulness to him, both are acceptable. But for either of those to be done, you must have true faith. Without faith, you won't be thankful to him, and without faith, you can't give in his name. Okay, so, because he changes your heart and enables you to give and truly give to his glory. All right, so anyways, in Ecclesiastes chapter 2, continuing, this is how we view riches with faith. He says, "Nothing is better for man than that he should eat and drink, and that his soul should enjoy good in his labor. This also I saw was from the hand of God." See, there is the statement of faith. Because the man without faith is blind, he can't see. So the way he words it here, he says, "I saw this was from the hand of God." So now he's acting in faith. He says, "For who can eat and who can have enjoyment more than I? For God gives wisdom and knowledge and joy to a man who is good in his sight. But to the sinner he gives the work of gathering and collecting, that he may give to him who is good before God." Okay, so right there, that's the comparison. It's between a man of faith and a man who doesn't have faith. He calls the man without faith a sinner. But to the one who is good in God's sight, he says that man, the difference is faith. And given to him is knowledge and joy. That's the difference. Because the man who doesn't believe that God has the say-so over his life, he's not Lord. He says, well, what I think is better than what God's knowledge says. Okay, and that's the difference. All right, so let's continue in chapter 6 in verse 7. He says, "All the labor of man is for his mouth, and yet his soul is not satisfied. For what more has the wise man than the fool? What does the poor man have who knows how to walk before the living? Better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of desire." Okay, so he's saying that all this labor that the rich man does is consumed with a temporary satisfaction that can possibly trick you into thinking that you are satisfied. However, Solomon sees that the rich man's soul is not really satisfied. So what more has the person who has riches than the one who does not? Then he starts describing the poor man as the man who knows how to walk. And what is walking? You go to the New Testament and it says, walk in the footsteps of Christ, because he's the way, the truth, and the life. So this poor man knows, and then he puts his faith in action by walking, following after God and the truth. Okay, so he says, what does the poor man have who knows how to walk before the living? Better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of desire. So this is implying that the man who has his eyes opened, his soul, his desire no longer wanders. He is now content. And if you stay in the Word and you follow what God says, you'll realize that everything in your life is by the hand of God. Now, if you trust God and His hand, you won't have any reason to fret or to seek after more. It almost forces you to be content. It's hard to explain, but that's the best I can give you. Okay, so believe it or not, we're almost through the chapter. There was only 12 verses. So that was verse 9. Better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of desire. This also is vanity and grasping for the wind. So in verse 10, he says, whatever one is, he has been named already, for it is known that he is man, and he cannot contend with him who is mightier than he. So this comes by faith. Whenever you follow God, he's going to let you know that, hey, you can't come to heaven where I am based on your state right now. And this is what he means when he says whatever one is, he has been named already. God has already told man that he is but a man. He is dust. And it says, for it is known that he is man. And knowledge of our state, of man's poor state, only comes from God. Because remember in the beginning that I said, think of America. Everybody in America has everything they could ever want, yet they're poor. See, but they don't see it because of the blessings and richness that God has given America. If you don't have faith, it can be a blinding curse. See, ultimately, the curse that was laid upon man can be lifted whenever you see God and have faith. Then everything becomes a blessing, even the vanity. So it says, when it says, and he cannot contend with him who is mightier than he, who is the one who is mightier? Well, God is mightier than man. And what he's saying here is that man is not able to overcome God, and that is only known through faith in what God says. All right, so in verse 11 it continues, since there are many things that increase vanity, how is man the better? So right here, this is a description of, he's kind of laying out a one verse summary of what he's covered so far. So if you've been through the other chapters or watched some of my videos on Ecclesiastes where it gives you the short version, you'll learn that there are things in this life that give temporary satisfaction, yet they must be repeated, such as eating food, things like that. Now your soul desire will wander and try all these things. For instance, food was one, and then partying would be another, to just get a satisfaction for a moment, yet afterward it brings despair. And sex could be one, where temporary satisfaction, but afterward it brings you hopelessness. Well, he's saying when these things increase, these things that are on a loop that you have to continually do, in the end, how are you any better off? Well, the answer is you're not. Then he continues in verse 12, he says, for who knows what is good for man in life, all the days of his vain life, which he passes like a shadow. Now this is implying that man, without God, doesn't know how to walk correctly. And then he says, who can tell a man what will happen after him under the sun? So both of those last questions imply, well, God can, the one who is mightier than man. All right, and that's how he ends the chapter. So real quickly, I want to go back to chapter 5, just to kind of end it in the podcast. So in chapter 5, starting in verse 12, he says this, the sleep of a laboring man is sweet, whether he eats little or much. So in chapter 2, remember, he hated his labor, but then he came back and said, but when I saw God, everything was given joy. He was given joy in everything he did. So that's what it's describing here. The sleep of a laboring man is sweet. It's saying this man has rest, and his labor was made sweet. Now in Proverbs chapter 26, it says this, my son, eat honey, because it is good, and the honeycomb which is sweet to your taste. So same wording used here. He's partaking of something that is sweet. And then it says, so shall the knowledge of wisdom be to your soul. If you have found it, there is a latter end, and your hope will not be cut off. So this is something you must find. And it's basically the knowledge that God gives. All right. But then it goes on in Ecclesiastes chapter 5. He says, the sleep of a laboring man is sweet, whether he eats little or much. So look, this man could have a lot or a little, and it doesn't matter. If you have faith, riches aren't a bad thing. See, I'm not demonizing wealth, and I hope you don't think that. It's just the way you look at things. Whenever God changes your heart, he'll renew your mind as well. And then true faith will show through how you look at everything and how you treat everything, and it'll show through your actions. Then it says, but the abundance of the rich will not permit him to sleep. So this man has no rest. All right. Then it says, there is a severe evil which I have seen under the sun, riches kept for their owner to his hurt. Now, I described sin as a fire, your passions, your sinful passions, as a fire. Now, how does this make sense? Well, let me read James chapter 2, and you'll kind of get a better view of what I'm saying. This is the brother of Christ, a believer, and this was a letter. I think it was a letter he wrote. He wrote this, but this is what it says. Verse 5. Listen, my beloved brethren, has God not chosen the poor of this world to be rich in faith and the heirs of the kingdom which he has promised to those who love him? But you have dishonored the poor man. Do not the rich oppress you and drag you into the courts? Do they not blaspheme that noble name by which you are called? If you really fulfill the royal law according to Scripture, you shall love your neighbor as yourself, you do well. But if you show partiality, you commit sin and are convicted by the law as a transgressor. Now, what is he saying here? He's saying these rich people oppress other people because what they love is money. So they are consuming others and taking their livelihoods. Is that making sense? So whenever you have sinful passions and love things you ought not, in place of the love you should have for God, it becomes a consuming fire. It consumes you, because it's going to consume these rich men. Whenever they get to heaven, they'll realize that they had made a grave mistake, and it will ultimately consume themselves. So they're harming themselves, plus they're harming others, because they're basically forcing their hand to get other people's money and take what should be left to the other people. See, if they cared for others, they would not be dragging people into courts and taking things from them. You see? And that's all done from a heart that has not been changed by God. So if your heart has been changed by God, why not just, instead of suing the person for wronging you, why not just take the wrong like Christ did? See, that's what a changed heart does. It loves your enemies even. You know, whoever is in your life, whether they hate you or not, that is your neighbor. And you shall love them, is what the Bible says. But love won't translate to them if you don't love God. You have to love God first, and then the other takes care of itself. All right? So that was basically chapter 6. That was probably really short. But yeah, I hope you come back. We're going to be looking at chapter 7 next time, and chapter 7 begins where Solomon starts to give the solution to man's condition. See, chapters 1 through 6 was more of him giving us a description of what man's problem is and why the curse is and what the curse is. And then 7 through 12 he starts giving us the solution to all of this madness, basically. Okay, so please join us for that, and I hope you have a wonderful week. I hope this has been helpful to you. If it has, please comment and give this video a thumbs up, because YouTube will then push it out to more people. All right, so God bless y'all. Y'all have a great week.